Hi, book club members. I'm Jen.
And I'm Carrie.
And this is Warhammer 40k Book Club, where we read from a crag. This is episode number 47. And our book is The Deacon of Wounds by David Annandale. The book is about an archdeacon who comes to power on a planet that's going through a rough patch.
Oh, is that what we're calling it?
Oh, it's a rough patch. We posted several questions on our site, WH40kbookclub.com, and we encourage participation in our discussions via Twitter, YouTube, our site, or Encrypted Box channel. Spoiler warning. If you haven't yet read this book, go to the site, check out the book in questions, and come back here as we're going to be discussing it in great detail. Additionally, I wouldn't be eating during this podcast. That's all I'm going to say. With that, let's dive in. So, did you like the book?
I did like the book. I wish I hadn't sat and read it all in one day, just because I had to eat in there. That's the only reason why. And I had lo mein for lunch, so there you go.
Mistakes were made. You know what though? Like because I texted you at a certain point in this book and was like, okay, our bylines need to be the worms crawl in, the worms crawl out. Like, I feel like that should have maybe been a hint. Like, do not ingest lo mein or spaghetti.
Okay. Well, I already know it's going to be my lunch. I'm reading the book. I get to page 104.
Mm-hmm.
The page 104. I'm just like,
the page.
Okay. None of this is okay. Like, not even a little bit, but I'm really hungry and I have to eat.
I read that scene on an airplane, and it was so hard because I'm sitting there and I'm just like, nah. Like, as I'm reading it just the whole time, like, and yeah, like trying to act cool though at the same time. I was glad that I had a mask on though, because so people couldn't see me, just like lots of grimaces and
lots of facial movement.
Lots of facial movement. I really liked this book though. Body horror is one of those really difficult genres, especially in books. In movies, it's a very tricky thing because you have like all of the classics from the 80s, like the Cronenberg ones, specifically Jeff Goldblum's The Fly. I think that movie is a really good example of walking right along the line of like, we're about to go into ridiculousness and just irritation, but not quite. John Carpenter's The Thing is, of course, like the equivalent of an text, like an movie. I don't know if you say that, for really well done. But a lot of times, like Tetsuo, the Iron Man, I think goes way over into grotesque ridiculousness where you're just like, oh. As my husband said about this book, miss me with that. Books, though, like body horror books are really difficult because I feel as though a lot of them are kind of like, oh, I guess that's body horror. It's like really weak sauce. Or they just go into like, it feels like a 13-year-old wrote it, where it's like the bloodening and things are exploding. And it's like lame.
Although I would actually have to say, though, that any Warhammer 40k book that involves the Death Guard has already walked into body horror.
Yeah, very much so. But I swear to God, I feel like David Annandale just woke up one morning and was like, I'm going to show him how this is done. And just decided to write like this fantastic body horror book. Blah. We're going to talk a lot about some of the scenes. Probably this next question, which scenes stuck out to you?
Oh, I don't know. Page 104.
The fact that you just texted me 104 and I was like, oh, I know exactly where she is.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't happen very often in a book where you're like, page 89, and someone's like, oh, what happened to page 189? I knew.
Yeah.
I just knew.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things I was expecting, and that was not it. I mean, we've seen some of these horror ideas before, like the first prologue had the whole incident with the flies, and that was pretty bad. But this was on something like on a whole different level. It was partly because there was so much of it going on, but it's also in a very small, confined space.
Very much so. And I definitely want to talk more about that one in a second because I have so many thoughts on that scene. That scene is just amazing. One of the things I have to mention, though, is how much I loved when Rodigus appeared. Because Rodigus is always called the Rainfather or the Rainmaker. And I was always like...
See? Something I never knew.
I was like, why though? Okay, so the only reason I know that is when I started painting some of the Death Guard figures, because they're really fun, I wanted to paint Kugoth. And so I was looking at all the different ones, and they had Rodigus, and they're like, oh, the Rainfather. And I was like, since when does Nurgle care about rain? I guess it kind of depends on your definition of rain. Which, of course, though, the only thing it can make me think of is if you've ever seen the really underrated movie from the early aughts, Bowfinger. They make this fake movie called Chubby Rain. And that's all I could think of there was when they were talking about these fat raindrops, because I had to think about something funny because it was really grossing me out. And him appearing, I was like, oh, you poor simple man, Ambrose.
Well, I knew something was up, and I had this feeling it was because of him, because his pride was mounting too quickly. I was like, all right, you're being played by somebody. I know exactly what is going on. Like when he didn't report Rosarius's body, and he was going to, but then something told him not to. I was like, well, there it is. That's what's really going on. Whatever's telling you not to, whatever's gotten into your head, that's what's actually going on.
I really liked seeing the inner workings of his mind, though, where he's like, oh, there's Rosarius's body, but he's a really good fall guy for this. Like, I can't, and just watching him work from that, I need to do the right thing, but, right? And when he talks about going over to the servitors, and it's just like, there's some debris over there. I was like, don't do the thing. Don't do the thing. Oh, he did the thing.
Into the wood chipper, like right out of Fargo.
Like out of Fargo, and that's your friend there in the wood chipper. That scene too, it was kind of funny because it was so. I mean, it was just very anticlimactic. Like the servitors are like, "Yep, into the wood chipper."
But then I thought it was
red
so funny
everywhere.
that I got red everywhere, and they freaked out. Made me think of Mo.
Right, exactly. Mo, like unclean, unclean, unclean. In more ways than one, my friends.
Right.
So let's talk about, because I think the morgue scene pretty much exemplifies why this is a really classic work of body horror. Could you hear that scene?
Yes.
I'm not Christopher Lee, so I don't know the sound of a man dying, but the sound of, it's one of my favorite stories about Christopher Lee. That man was a badass. But when they're describing the bone, the woman's head hitting the slab and her arms, I could hear that scene.
I couldn't hear that.
Oh, I could hear it. I was like, no.
But it was the flies. I could hear that.
Very much so. And the other thing that I could hear is when they talked about, and this is where body horror, this is why it's so well done, when he talks about their throats distending. And you could just hear that noise that frogs make. Just,
yeah.
What is going on? Anyways, that scene and the worms, the eyeballs coming out, and worms are a trigger issue for me. Maggots and carnivorous worms.
Well, I mean, that's just something that should not be in the body. Just. That's I like looking at medical images and things like that. Yeah. I've always been into that stuff. But the first time I saw one where you could see a worm wrapped in someone's body, you can see it because that's how close it is and how long it is, and it's like, no, that's not okay.
Not okay.
That movie, The Mummy. I know it's a silly movie, but that scene where the scarab beetle just burned the guy's skin and went up, that is not okay. It's just, no.
When I was in high school, we had one of my I almost said coworkers, one of my classmates her older brother volunteered with Doctors Without Borders, and he came and he did this big presentation, and he talked about being in, I want to say it was in Kenya, but yeah, I want to say it was either Kenya or Congo. But he talked about being there, and he had these pictures. He was talking about how parasitic worms are a big problem, and he had a picture of them removing worms from a man's body in surgery. It looked like they had just pulled handfuls of spaghetti out of this man.
Yeah.
You guys, I was like 17. I can still see that image vividly. It scarred me. So this book, like reading this the whole time, I was like, it's like sentient spaghetti in somebody's body now.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, it's not okay. But it worked really well for this book, right?
It
because
did.
I mean, as soon as they started singing, as worms do, that was the part where I was like, oh, not only is this unquestionably some Nurgle stuff, oh dear.
Well, as soon as they're crying worms, I was like, either this really is a plague, or this is some Nurgle stuff. Just because my first thought with the worms, I was actually thinking of, Dan Abnett's short story about the Inquisitor who died of brain worms.
Oh, good point.
And that's actually what kind of thought of it. The only reason why I didn't lean into that too much was just the way that Lorenz died. It was too chaosy for that to really be it, especially with the flies. When you bring the flies in there, like I already know that's chaos all over it.
Yes, and the way that he was wrapped up like a mummy, like he was like he was in a chrysalis.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, nice choice of words there, bucko.
Oh, it was wonderful. I was actually fully expecting some like metamorphosis style thing going on there.
Kind of did.
Kind of. But then, yeah, with the worms coming out, just... It's not okay.
No.
As you said, it's not okay. But I think this book also is a really good illustration because of this. I think it's a good illustration about the difference between Warhammer 40k horror and just Warhammer 40k.
Right, a story about the Death Guard. Yeah.
Exactly. Because it's like when you look at Lords of Silence, there's so much. I think you said earlier, like there's like subtle body horror there already. Their spleens are hanging out of their bodies, for God's sake. And they slosh when they walk. That really messed me up. So they're already pretty horrific and pretty awful. So, but this definitely, and again, I think it might be because it was with regular human beings, right? They have, especially that frailty to them where, right. I mean, this plague was like that, right? You got it and you're pretty much killed.
Right. Yeah, which is like, well, that's... I mean, the only thing I know of in the Warhammer 40k universe that goes that fast is some chaos shit. That's just kind of how it works. Which already, you knew that's what was going on in the very beginning with the flies and that prologue. And the shrouded person that he thought he saw but never saw again. You knew that was some chaos stuff going on. And the sad thing about that with Lorenz was that I thought that is what triggered him to suddenly become reclusive, that he became afraid, like agoraphobic in a way, just not leaving. But then you find out, his last moments that no, he was just an asshole. I mean, there was nothing really made him, hoard everything and not care about anybody. He was just a jerk. That's just all there was to it.
He was, but here's an interesting thing to ask about him. So what happens if Lorenz and Rosarius keep control of the planet? And this is one of those motifs that I always really like. I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago now. The Great with Rachel Weisz and Emma Stone. It did this really well, where you're initially presented with a character who seems awful. right? And Lorenz certainly was not a good person. He was corrupt, like in the traditional sense of the word,
Right.
with this like hoarding resources and money for him and the wealthy and really not caring about the common people. And yet, like when faced with that, here's the thing that I wonder with them keeping the ecclesiarchy basically walled in this walled garden of theirs, they probably could have kept the plague, this horrible, awful plague, sequestered. And then the rest of the planet just dies from starvation and dehydration, which I know is awful.
Well, yeah, but they had to do that ceremony though, and it was the ashes that so conveniently spread it. Yeah. So, but so obviously, the shrouded guy was hanging
Gnosis.
out. Yeah, was looking for a victim. And he didn't see any way to get to Lorenz, I think. Because
I think that's somewhere in Lorenz. I think because he was so miserly, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Because
exactly.
Lorenz was so miserly, like he kept it to himself, right? He gets sick and he's feeling awful and he had this horrible event, but he kept inside his walled garden and he kept to himself. And I don't know if Rosarius would have been a good replacement for him, like in terms of like the chaos and anarchy that Ambrose helps spread.
Right, because Rosarius would have again followed in his footsteps and kept everything in there and not done anything. So that's not really a way for Nurgle to get his foothold. But then Gnosis sees this in Ambrose, who goes to the garden and just sits in frustration. He's like, I think I know what I can do here. And again, like I said, is one of those, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And he wasn't very subtle about it. And if Ambrose really stopped to think about it, but I think this is one of those things that, when they were talking about the plague, and he was like, I have no idea what could cause this. It's just one of those things that just shows that maybe by not knowing about demons, you're doing more harm than good. Because that's the perfect way for these demons to get in there and be like, hey, we can help. And it just was, of course, it was so convenient that Gnosis was like, I happened to find this thing in the archives. Like, oh, here we go. And if Ambrose could have looked past his own ambitions and what he felt was the Emperor's purpose for him, he would have seen, like, there's no way in hell something like this the Emperor would ask for. This kind of ritual.
Right.
Like, because when has the Emperor ever asked for human sacrifice? The answer is only in war. It's not to say never, but only in war.
The psyker snacks that he gets every day.
Yeah, okay. That's true.
They're like cheesy poofs, but psychers and people.
Yes, that is very true.
But you're absolutely correct. And I think that was one of the things that was really interesting, again, is that we see Lorenz, who's just, really, he and Rosarius are just your run-of-the-mill, corrupt, incompetent. Now, and it is a little unfair to call them incompetent because you're undergoing a drought.
Right.
Like, what are you going to do?
And they both did have a point that if they opened up the reserves, yes, these people would survive longer, but now they're all on a short waiting list.
Exactly.
And Ambrose is wanting to help everybody, and how humble he really was. This is something that's so easy for these chaos gods to latch onto if you're just not that careful.
I don't know that I think he was really that humble. I think he was, mostly, but I think one of the things that I think with this book especially highlights is I think there was a crack there. And I think that Gnosos was able to prey on that ambition, prey on that desire to be the savior, the guy, right? I think with Lorenz, his whole thing is I just want to live a little bit longer and hoard all my money and all of my, like, I just want to get off this planet. There's nothing really there for Knossos to exploit.
Exactly.
Right? Because you're like, it dies with you, dude. And Rosaria seemed to be very much that same way. So yes, not good people, but also not as easily corruptible by chaos. And I think Ambrose.
But I love that though. It's so sad, but it's so sad how easy this is. But it's because these people are such good people and they just want to help. It makes it 10 times easier for chaos to come in. So it's like there's benefits to being an ass. Sadly.
I mean, I can't argue with that.
Yeah.
There really is this benefit to being this horribly selfish person. And in this case, you just want to get off this planet and go find somewhere else. And I was joking with my husband that this book is kind of like Candyland. So for people who are not aware, Candyland is a wholly unique board game because from the second that you deal the cards, like you shuffle the card deck, the winner is predetermined.
Yes.
There's no chance or anything like that. When you opened the cover of this book, this planet was dying. There was no saving this planet. If Lorenz stayed in power, they all die of dehydration and starvation. Ambrose taking over goes less than well. And I also have to ask myself a little bit, what's better? Like, what's worse? Is it better to die miserable of starvation and dehydration, or is it better to die in fear and actually being corrupted? Like, these people were terrified when they died. They went from being miserable to terrified.
Death or death by exile? I mean, you're not helping here.
Well, I guess, I'm trying to figure out, is there one that's worse than the other?
Which I think is what honestly happens, so much. Even the last book that we read, when the sisters were interrogating that cultist.
Mm-hmm.
And she was explaining, she's like, we were starving. They offered us help. It's like, you should have died instead of help. Well, what choice is that? Die by these hands or die, maybe you'll die and maybe it'll be horrific, but so you take the chance that you won't be starving anymore. That's just part of it. And it's really hard to say you should rather die than serve. Well, that's really easy for these pious sisters who get food to say.
Right.
Or the Space Marines even, who get food or don't really need food. Put it that way.
They're not wondering where their next meal is coming from. No. And with the sisters, I think one of the things that they often neglect, because they live in these perfect lives, right, where they don't have children they have to feed. They don't have a spouse they need to take care of. They are basically on an island of taking care of myself. And obviously my sister's alongside with me, but basically everything else is pretty much taken care of, right?
Just like the Space Marines. I mean, they don't have
very
kids.
Much so.
They're not married. It's got their brothers. No. It's cool.
They've never had to look at their kid and explain, sorry, we're not eating tonight. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's very easy for them to be well, obviously the correct choice was to die. But it does come down to this core concept of Warhammer 40k that, to quote the beginning of the young adult series, life is hard in the 41st millennium. And I actually, people made fun of that, and I love it because I'm girl, tell me. Life is really hard. And I think that comes to one of the pitfalls of the core centers of their beliefs, right? And that's one of the things with the sisters that I kind of have to agree with, where it's if you believe your soul goes to the side of the Emperor when you die, it would have had you starved to death. But now no, because now you're corrupted.
Right.
And with these guys, you are now the unquiet dead.
What happened to that cultist's soul? As she went to the Sea of Souls, what happened? She was immediately torn apart by all these demons. So she's going to live in eternity in agony rest of her life. Instead of rest of her soul existence, sort of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I always think of Spear of the Emperor, where she talks about how, where Honorata talks about how she definitely does not see that one woman being torn apart by the other spirits in the warp, right? That's awful. And again, you really are the playthings for these laughing gods, right?
Right.
So, and that's one of the things too, where I'm just like, dude, had Ambrose not done anything, everybody would have starved and it would have been really awful and horrible. And yet, you would not have been the unquiet dead and the playthings of chaos. Because now this planet is now owned by Rodriguez. And I'm sure he is going to be a really good leader.
Well, I mean, if he's part of Nurgle's followings, he loves everybody.
That is true. And he tends to be a little less dour than Kugoth. So party on Theotokos. Yes, Theotokos.
Sure. Theotokos.
I had to look back down at it because I was like, I'm gonna leave out an O. There's a lot of O's in the name, but like, party on Theotokos with Rodriguez, your host.
Yes, he's making it rain, y'all. He's making it rain. Thank you.
Damn you.
I did to say one thing I thought was so very clever of Mr. Annandale was when Gnosis is talking him into doing this ritual, and he mentioned, the Father will give us gifts. And right when he said gifts, I was like, well, hold on a minute. I already know what this means.
Can we define gifts?
I already know what this means. So I was like, so he's talking about, the Nurgle father. I didn't know about Rodriguez, but that's what I was thinking of. And then I went, wait a second, hold on. So I actually flipped back to when Gnosis first talks to him, because he gives him this blessing. And he
says the
Father will make it rain. But, at the time I didn't think anything of it, because you hear them call the Emperor, our Father. Especially if you're from a Christian background, you think of God and your Father in heaven and all that. Didn't think anything of it. So, it's almost kind of battle stations, like, to me, to go back and be like, oh, yeah, he'd already planted those seeds early
that
on.
Actually, as soon as he said Father, I was like, oh, they don't often refer, like, the sisters often refer to him as Father, but I was like, oh, not a lot of people refer to this man as their father. So my first thought, like, I was looking at it and I was like, excuse you, are you a Primarch? Because that's the only person who gets to call him Dad.
And as soon as he said that, sir,
you are not Robbie Bobby, sir. You're not even me. But I'm looking at it like, oh, that's not good. But again, and I think you touched on this a little bit, and there's not only an ignorance to the warp and demons, but there's this very anti-knowledge mentality. So when Moreno is like, I don't know what this is. I've never seen anything like this. And Ambrose, when he's in that morgue, like, looking in that morgue, as he starts looking through, right? And he's like, oh, these are all Lorenz's cronies, right? Well, because they would have had access to him as he was sick. But he never once is he like, this is so weird. Like, what would have caused this? Like, that would have been an Inquisitor's job, right? To take a step back and be like, how is this spreading? What are we looking at? And they just automatically went into panic.
He starts to, because he says, he's like, how is it so selective? He started to go down that route, but then gets distracted.
And then he just falls back on, oh, it's corruption. Clearly. And I think there's something really interesting here about Ambrose's journeys and what it says about the pitfalls of righteousness in the Warhammer 40k universe. We've talked about this a lot before, how one guy in a position of power who is convinced that he is right can do so much damage. Like, so much damage. And there's a couple of things going on here. One is his conviction. Oh, this is corruption. This is not a sickness. This is corruption. And on one hand, yes.
Yes, there is corruption
but also
here.
no. Like,
right.
These people were probably not corrupt before they got sick, but the warp is definitely at work here, darling. And you're helping it. Just throwing that out there, buddy.
Nothing is sadder than doing work in the Emperor's name and you're not doing the Emperor's work at all. I actually wrote down page 124. I was like, no, Ambrose, no. Because I saw exactly what was, and that was when he was starting to talk about, these are my people. I have my purpose. I am here to save them. I was like, I know exactly what this is. And actually, I wrote down one of my favorite quotes from a movie that horrified me, and I've only seen once, and I'll never watch it again. Vanity. It's my favorite sin.
Good times.
Yep.
That one? That one horrified you?
Yeah. I can't. I can't with that movie. Like, it was very good. It was very well done. It made its point very well. I will never watch it again.
That's fair. I have a few movies like that. Not that one though. But yes, and that's why I think that there was at his heart, because remember, he kind of starts that in the beginning where he's like, oh, they're listening to me. No, they're not listening to me. They're listening to the Emperor through me, right? But he already starts wrestling with that in the beginning. And then, sure enough, as we get to the end, you're absolutely right. And I noticed that too, where I was like, oh, okay. So I actually felt really bad for him in the beginning because Knossos is so clearly like, manipulating him and doing the warp thing. And so I felt really bad for Ambrose because I was like, oh, honey, you're just trying to do the right thing. That scene right there, I was like, oh, nah, I don't feel sorry for you anymore. You had this in you to begin with. There was a kink there. And you... Yeah. That was... And I think, again, when you have this unquestioning, wavering faith in the Emperor, and you don't, like, anything else is heresy to even, like, question...
No,
can lead you down.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right with that. And it was really, for me, when I was like, there's no hope for this guy anymore. It is when they are destroying that huge hab. They said it was like half a mile long and wide. And as it's burning and they're shooting the people trying to escape, he is pointing to it and yelling, doing the typical preacher of the fire and damnation, the fire and brimstone and damnation all coming down. It's like, you've lost it. Anytime we've ever seen a priest, a preacher, hell, the Space Marines chaplain go down that road, it's never a good thing. And actually, James Swallow actually wrote that in his Blood Angels series. The chaplain was believing that the main character Rafen, his brother, was Sanguinius reborn, not realizing that it was all this Inquisitor who'd been corrupted by Tzeentch, manipulating everybody. But then the chaplain was like very resolute. He's like, no, this is Sanguinius reborn, and you must bow down to him, and you must praise him, and not the Emperor, because this is the Emperor's son reborn, type thing. But it became immediately that. And so that was the first thing I thought of when he starts, yelling about, this is the corruption. See what heresy has wrought. It's like, no, you're doing this. This is all you. Like, these people, yes, they're all going to die. It's unfortunate. They're all going to die, but they didn't have to go like this.
Right, exactly. And all I could think of as he's sitting there screaming about this is all I could think of is we are all sinners in the hands of an angry God. Right? Like this very Calvinist look at just, and I think, and I don't know, like, if I were to give him the benefit of the doubt, I would say that maybe at that point he goes so far into denial that he's just like, this has to be what it is. Like, there's no other rational explanation for this. It has to be heresy, has to be corruption. But I think it really was that arrogance of, I have labeled this corruption. It's getting worse. Oh, it's definitely corruption now because I can't be wrong.
Not only
And
that,
they're
but I
really-
have been in the middle of it and it didn't affect me. Like, which makes me wonder, what could it be that the reason why you didn't get the plague is because the people who did get it were ones that would not have submitted to Nurgle? Could be.
That was exactly what I thought, actually. Because I was like, oh, Pumpkin, they're the righteous ones. You're the corrupt one. Because, again, and I know because they have the complete and total ignorance to this, they have no idea what's going on. I think an Inquisitor, right, would have looked at that and been like, yeah, that guy's the problem. When there's, oh, I'm sorry, you say that only one person has survived this? Go on.
Well, and an Inquisitor,
Somebody get the heavy flamer.
I mean, if an Inquisitor or even a sister, even a battle sister was there and saw what happened to Lorenz, forget Ambrose with what happens with him, but just with Lorenz, they're like, okay, we're calling in Exterminatus. May the Emperor have mercy on your souls.
The planet was dying from the time you opened the cover. Mm-hmm. Like, again, this is the Candyland book. It was predetermined. Nobody was getting out of this.
Right.
At all. Because, yeah, this planet was doomed. And I did like the idea where they mention it very early on, where they're talking about how Lorenz wants to get off the planet. And they're talking about it later. I can't remember. I think it is with Lorenz. They're talking about him getting off the planet. And they're like,
Rosarius, actually.
Oh, it was Rosarius. That's right. And they're like, nobody's been coming by in 2 years. Yeah, you guys have been left for dead.
Mm-hmm.
Because life in the 40k universe is very hard. Like,
and they are pretty quick to cut their losses.
Oh yeah, like, oh, I'm sorry, you guys having a drought, it hasn't rained in more than a year and you can't produce anything anymore? Bye, Felicia. Like, we don't need you anymore. You're pretty much useless. Good luck. And that, like, and you know that, like, had it started raining naturally, again, and the Imperium would have been back, like, where's our stuff? But we don't really have much use for a planet that's basically dying.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's, again, it's pretty hardcore and harsh. What are you going to do, though?
Oh, I mean, it's like what Reboot did about Imperium Nihilus. Sorry, y'all.
Good luck! Y'all have Dante, though. This planet didn't even have Dante. It had that's the other thing I was going to say.
Because it's a desert planet. It's like his people.
Right?
With water that will kill you. I mean...
But... So, like, that would also be another horrible death. Because what if it's like the flesh terrors who drop down on that planet?
Oh.
Yeah.
Oops.
Whoopsie.
You're here
all
to
of a sudden,
save us. Yes, but actually, no.
Right, exactly.
The Grey
like,
Knights? Yeah.
That's not going to go well either.
No. The Grey Knights show up on your planet. It's not going to go well for somebody.
I always think of that scene in Megamind. I wouldn't say saved, more like under new management. Like, especially if the Grey Knights show up. Like, oh yeah, no, you're saved. Totally. Go line up over there. It's not going to be good. They especially, and I think, but again, they would have instantly recognized it, right? And been like, yeah, this is all bad. Especially, we don't know where Knossos came from, which is actually one of the things I think was kind of nice about this book. And you and I talked about this a lot, and I really do want to give a shout out to it, that this book was like the anti-Stephen King book.
It's The Stand is what it is.
It's the anti-The Stand. It reminds me a lot of Pet Sematary, in that it had a very quick story to tell. There's no needless exposition. There's no like random jaunts into side characters that we don't care about. There's really no fluff or padding in this.
Randall Flagg doesn't show up, so.
It's pretty nice too. But like, we didn't have this entire dalliance into these other characters' lives. Nope. This book is about Ambrose fighting a plague. Who, what, when, where, why, how, the end. And even then, there's a lot of stuff that, like, Where did Knossos come from? Who is he really? Not really important.
As far as I know, he might have caused the drought. I mean,
right? I mean, we know that chaos plays the long game. So, and I do really like.
Yeah, where
that.
are they
like,
going?
Right? Like, they got nothing but time. One of the reasons I also compare this to Pet Sematary is that he never explains in that book how the cemetery works because it's not important to the book. So there's a lot of things in here where I was like, how, you know what? It's not important. And it kind of adds to the like, ooh, that's like this guy just showed up out of nowhere.
You know, the only thing I wanted explained was the plague. I didn't want it like how, well, maybe I did, but it's hard to explain the reason for it. And when I find out it's, you know, Nurgle, I'm good. That's all I really needed. Yeah.
Pretty much.
It doesn't matter to me like how it spread, if it was the ashes or if it was something else. It doesn't matter to me.
No. And that, I appreciate a good horror story, any story really, but especially a good horror story that can just cut to the chase. Here's the thing that happened, and we're done. And we'll talk more about that particular comparison in a second here. But here's a question that I have. So in the beginning, when Moreno gets sick, and some of the cronies, when he's in that morgue scene, remember, she looks at him and she's like, "Are you happy?"
Yeah, that was so weird.
That was weird. And remember that all of Lorenz's cronies were I think the exact phrase was like, we're spitting violent hatred at him, despite dying. Like, they're all looking accusingly at him. Do you think they knew what was up? Do you think they were just assuming that, like, oh, you've poisoned all of us to get rid of Lorenz?
Possibly. Like, I don't think that they knew, you know, that he inadvertently let Knossos curse everybody.
Right.
I don't think that, you know, that they got the whole memo.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, but they talked about, you know, Morana, she was loyal to the Cardinal because he was the Cardinal. And she was not
right.
happy.
She was more loyal to the figure, not necessarily the dude.
The title. She was loyal to the title. And I think that she saw Ambrose stepping up a little too quickly, even though they were following proper protocol.
Yes. But everybody knew that he disagreed with Lorenz, and he was just a little too Johnny on the spot. And that's again goes back to me thinking there was always this ambitious core to him. Because remember, he runs down there, and as soon as he sees Rosarius isn't in there, he's like, okay, good. And he kind of gloats a little bit when Rosarius comes into Lorenz's room. He's kind of like...
Yeah, he's as much as he was saying that he didn't really like the politics that Rosarius and Lorenz were making him play, he played into it pretty well. And maybe that's just part of being in the ecclesiarchy. Because he was, whether he realizes it or not, he was playing his own game by being out there with the people, being the face out there when Lorenz was locked, you know, hiding away in his little cloister. I mean, one thing I thought was very interesting near the beginning of the book was when he was talking about the lies he tells himself. And and about halfway through the book, I was like, that part stuck with me, and it made me realize there was a reason he was talking about the lies he tells himself, because that's what he's constantly doing. You know, that
very much so.
I mean, do I believe he actually did go survey the planet? Because he wanted to see what was going on, and he was really worried about everybody. Oh, absolutely. Do I believe he cared?
Absolutely.
He cared about the people more than Lorenz did? Yes, 100%. But he was still playing that political game of the people like me, because he even talked about his sermons, that they could tell the difference when he was force-fed a sermon versus when he talked to them.
Yes.
So he's already kind of playing that, and when he going after Rosarius the way that he did without even having any proof that it had anything to do with him. And I remember hearing on this one as a kid's show, and they were saying, you know, if you're constantly thinking it's this one person, you might overlook who the real killer is. Which is exactly 100% what happened.
Very much so. And yes, they really, and that was one of the things that I really liked, because sometimes in books you'll see, and this happens a lot of the times in horror novels, where you'll see a character all of a sudden change on a dime to become this very arrogant, very self-centered character. He did a really good job of establishing that this guy isn't as humble as he pretends to be. He's not as removed from it. There is this kind of, and as you said, like, I think it's a nature of it. And I say this about politics, like, all the time. And I think the show Veep, I refuse to believe that show is not a documentary. And it's hysterical. But, like, I don't think you can get to a certain level in politics in real life without, like, having a certain level of arrogance and douchebaggery. And I absolutely believe that about the ecclesiarchy. Like, you have to have a little bit of political knowledge. You have to have a little bit of all of these things, right? These bad qualities that are there to even get that high and far, even if your planet's dying. You don't make it to Archdeacon without knowing how to play the game a little bit.
You don't get to the fat priesthood without working your way there.
Pretty much. Exactly. Like, he knows and he was also very savvy to the game, right? Like, he could recognize the game, and he could recognize, like, oh, well, Lorenzo's pumping me through these speeches because he wants to focus on this thing, right? So, like, he recognized where the pieces were moving. So it tells you that he was pretty savvy to it.
And he was so arrogant to think that he was above all that. That was the saddest part. Which is, you know, why
so above it
played into, you know, made me think of Devil's Advocate, vanity. It's got to be my favorite sin.
I really don't like that movie, if we're being honest right now. But so here's the thing. What happens next with this? Because here's something very interesting so one of my favorite entry stories into the Warhammer 40k genre is actually written by David Annandale too, and it's in that, I know I mention this all the time, but it's in that Wicked and the Damned. He has a story about a priest who is in love with a woman, and the difference is that his faith is kind of faltering. And he says to her, like, well, what if I don't continue to be a priest? What if, like, just you and I go away somewhere? And of course she's like, oh my God, what are you saying? Right. And it kind of, there's this, he definitely, like, David Annandale likes that theme of these guys wanting something that they can't really have, which I think is a very interesting theme within Warhammer 40k in general, because again, that's all the crack in the door that chaos needs. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want something?
Right.
Because
I can help with that. Just saying.
I can help with that. Exactly. And so here's the thing that I wonder, and this is why the Pet Cemetery thing was so apt as well. Like, in the end, like, remember when he's killing her family, he even says, he's like, it's all for her. Right. Like, on one hand, she's the sacrifice. Like, I have to do this awful, horrible thing and she has to witness it, but it's okay because she's going to live and I'm going to save her. So is this like Pet Cemetery, like, are Bethia and Ambrose now going to become the king and queen of Plaguelandia?
Well, I mean, when I finished the book, I texted you the last line of Pet Cemetery. That was how you knew I finished. Because that was all
Darling.
I could think. That was all I could think of. Darling.
And a voice filled with dirt. That is easily one of the greatest last lines to any of his books. And yes, in the voice filled with dirt, darling. And of course, so
and this one, forgive you, but you gave me life. Oh God, I just got chills all over again.
Her body squirmed as if her skin were filled with snakes. But you gave me life. And then she stirred. So here's the question first off.
Oh.
And so also her voice was slurred. It thrummed with tiny wings.
Mm-hmm. She's not alive.
You know,
Not in.
not in the way you mean. Um, so,
Not in the way that the deacon
first off,
is, for now.
is it Bethia, or is this some demon? I don't know. I go back and forth on this.
I don't know if it's a demon, but almost like a cultist. You know, like just one of the Nurgle worshippers now.
Right. Like, is this some warp entity that comes out? No, but you've given me life. Right? Like, you birthed me. And I kind of wondered about that. Like, I actually expected that to be where the demon came out. Like, remember in Shroud of Night when that guy turns into the Keeper of Secrets? I very much expected that. Or in the second Plague War book, where that guy just like melts down, right? So that they could have the
little messenger
conversation.
And Typhus is just like, this is
as
really,
one does.
Really interesting. I'm just going to sit here and watch this.
I love that scene. Because the whole time Typhus is like, this is fascinating. Like, no, it's not, son. It's really awful.
That poor soldier was still alive. Oh my god.
So awful. So, like, was it something like that where it's like this warp entity now that's in Bethia and you just gave me life, my friend? Or is it really partially her? And now she, as you said, she is now fully on board the Nurgle train.
Well, because actually I was thinking of, I don't remember the guy's name, but that poor Imperial Guardsman that Vorks removed his heart and kept it in a pouch.
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking that she was now like that, you know, just one of the minions.
That's so bad. But again, that guy still had some of his sentience, though. And some of what made him Captain Danvers? Something like that, though. Captain something.
Not Captain Marvel.
Shut up. As soon as I said that, I was like, no. It is either Kamala Khan or Carol. Anyways, it was something like that, though. Now I'm going to have to look this up later. But anyways, the idea that it's still partially him, but different.
That's kind of...
So now, again, I ask again, what happens next?
Oh, there's not a happy ending for anybody. Either...
I don't know. Like, do they both just become king and queen of Plaguelandia?
I honestly think he kills himself.
But does that last? We already saw the dead rise from their graves in this book, as was. So does he kill himself and then, like, immediately later he's back up full of snakes?
Yeah, but I don't know if those were people back to life or they were just reanimated. Does that make sense?
Right. No, that totally makes sense.
And that could be what happens to him, but I believe he kills himself.
Oh, I think so. But does he also look at this as the chance to be with his love?
Is it his love anymore, though?
You guys, I'm not going to lie. I really kind of like the idea of him just being like, this is fine. And then becoming like these plague cultists that just help tend Nurgle's garden. It's like, if you think about it, it's like a very odd happily ever after for like a very Warhammer 40k happily ever after.
Sure.
Just saying. I want somebody on the Chaos side to have a happily ever after, okay? And Septimus and Octavia got robbed.
Okay.
So now...
But by default, by being on Chaos, you're not supposed to get your happy ending.
I'm just saying that romance can exist on the Chaos side of the line, too.
You barely get a happy ending on the Imperial side.
Yes. But
the closest we had was in Knights of Macragge, and even then that was really a sad thing because his mind was half gone.
Well, and they were like, so the orcs are going to come back? Yeah, you know that? Yeah. So we'll have a few years before the wah comes through, which is pretty much, like the happiest ending you could imagine. I guess I kind of like the idea that maybe somewhere chaos does kind of sort of in a monkey's paw sort of way grant your wish. Like, I just really want to be able to be with the woman I love. Granted. But you're both now kind of reanimated, like, warp creatures, and you rule Rodriguez's planet together. Isn't that nice?
I mean, Apocalypse kind of had that. You know, they had those cultists had that kiss, and she walked away, and then the Raven Guard swooped down and killed him. So at least they had that moment. You know, that's more than what they would have had normally.
See. I'm just saying, I kind of, like, in a really weird way, like, I got to the end of the book and I was like, well, I hope they have a really nice life together on this horrible, awful planet. And I hope that some part of him occasionally is looking out of his eyeballs thinking, wow, did I back the wrong horse? Like, but maybe they won't because they're together.
You know, it's one of those that I listen to, like, a lot of true crime podcasts, mostly thanks to Jen, but, like, I've gotten into some like cult podcasts, and they talk about when they're out all the red flags that they should have seen that we on the outside are like, why didn't you see that?
Why didn't you see this?
That's kind of what this is. There's all these red flags.
Very much so. Very much so. Like, there were all these signs. The guy that just shows up
and disappears
nowhere. Like, you don't.
And then you never see him again. And then he takes you to this part of the archive that you've never been to before through an invisible wall. I mean,
it's like a clearly. And as soon as he walks in there, he gets that, like, whoa, danger, Will Robinson. Like, because remember, he's like, oh, it smells bad. Like, this is not right. But then again, that arrogance and that curiosity of, but I could save the planet, just takes over. And you find yourself reading. And I do like when he's reading it and he's like, this is really not the language typically used within the ecclesiarchy, but maybe it's just old. But, like, he does have that moment of different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because it wasn't written in the original Caucasian. Saying the Bible's a lie.
It might have been. I mean,
I don't think so. This didn't strike me as having Lorgar's flair to it. Like, when you look at the words to it, like, it even feels wrong as you read it, even for us, right? Where you're like, this is not a normal. What was the one? Hear our prayer, Rain Father. Oh, Rodriguez.
Like, right there. Right there. How is that not a red flag? Rain Father.
Right. Well, okay, so now this guy would have no way of knowing this. This is player knowledge, not character knowledge. That they talk about how the emperor is worshipped differently on different planets, right? So, like, agricultural planets do very much picture him as, like, this agricultural god, where instead of having the sword, he has, like, a scythe, right? Because he's helping you harvest the wheat. But he wouldn't have known that. But they do talk about how he takes different guises. So if you're having a planet that's having drought, maybe Rainfather doesn't seem out of there. But, I closed the book after I was looking for that one passage, but where it talks about, like, how thou crownest, and you're like, this is not, thou crownest our hopes with abundance, and thy paths drop fatness.
Yeah, not even the King James version is that weird.
No, this is some weird shit. Like,
the fatness.
The fatness. Well, again, because, Nurgle, right?
Well, obviously.
He's got some weird things about him.
Yeah, no.
Just saying.
There was too many red flags. Yes, there was some, player knowledge. There was some character knowledge there, too, that he just chose. Like we learned, all these people who leave cults, there's these red flags that they choose to ignore. They choose
to ignore because they want it. And very similarly, right, like when you listen to, I think we've both listened to a couple of the same podcasts about cults, there is this need to belong or this desire for something. And I think Ambrose definitely had all kinds of desires. Some good, some selfish. And Chaos is just, again, just all too happy. And I think I really, like, in some ways, this book really felt like a cautionary tale, right?
You're saying that this could have been a Canterbury Tale?
Like, the grossest one ever.
I don't know. Some of those were pretty nasty.
Yeah, but not like... So I was really disappointed that the pages weren't colored, because that's really my jam on the horror line. But then you saw these little boys. I was like, oh, that'll do. I don't think our next book is going to have flies in it, and I'm really glad that we read. Now, this was not a light book in terms of, like, because we spent a lot of time going, ew, gross, gnarly. But it was a nice read before we dive into our next book, which I think is going to be a little heavier in terms, and mine is in transit still.
In terms of thickness, yes.
Oh! It was really nice to have a breezy read. We should have saved this for the beach. Maybe this would have been our beach read.
That's 350 pages.
It's not terrible. It is a little bigger, but we're really excited. This is a book that's more than 10 years in the making. Penitent. Super excited to see what happens with Beckwith as she plays the worst game of Would You Rather ever. Would you rather trust Eisenhorn or Ravener? I'll go with neither, Bob.
That's the safest choice.
Right? Exactly. It's going to be the end of War Game. This is like the safest choice is not to play. How about a nice game of chess? Because I'm really excited for this book too, because I think we're both going in on different teams.
Oh, well, yeah. We've already drawn our lines in the sand, like in Twilight.
I am 100% Team Ravener, which is shocking still.
It's not surprising. I'm Team Eisenhorn.
Team Heretic.
Oh, okay.
Saying. Anyways.
You have Team... Okay.
Want to take us out,
This
Carrie?
is going to be interesting because we just talked about the arrogance of being righteous, and that's what Ravener is doing.
Also Eisenhorn, who is still fighting a war that he needs to retire from.
So
it was a metaphor.
So does Ravener.
Take us out, Carrie.
This is going to be fun. If not, even if we don't enjoy the book, it'll be fun taking sides.
I'm so excited.
It'll be a good time. So thank you all so much for joining us for this episode, the Warhammer 40k Book Club with our Deacon of Wounds by David Annandale. Be stay tuned for our next book, which is going to be Penitent. Every time I say this, I keep thinking of Temple of Doom. No, not Temple of Doom, but The Last Crusade, the penitent man will pass. That's all I can think of.
Same, actually.
Yep. So, and it is by Dan Abnett. So, but we are an unofficial book club and not affiliated with the Black Library or any of its affiliates. You can find both the vidcast and podcast on our website, WH40kbookclub.com. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, give a review, and all those things to the vidcast on YouTube or the podcast on anywhere you get podcasts. Don't forget, we also have a Patreon where we offer 2 different tiers of content for your viewing and listening pleasure. You can learn more about that at patreon.com/WH40kbookclub. Our site also has articles about our adventures in reading other Warhammer 40k books and short stories outside of the book club books. So please stay a while and read from a crag. I'm still Alfarius.
I still have chartreuse. Get you some.